everyone, Becky here. Thank you so much for joining me today and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. And if you are new, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you're notified whenever I release new videos. But today we are sewing up the Sulvabelle. Don't come for me if I'm saying that wrong. It's the new swim pattern from Little Lizard King and it is so cute. I am obsessed with it. There's a couple options. There is a bikini or a one piece, and then each of those also have the option for thick straps or binding. And I'm actually going to be sewing up the thick wide straps one piece today, and I will be doing the bows down the side, which are an optional detail, but they are so cute. I think they are what makes the swimsuit what it is. And I will be using swim fabric from Raspberry Creek. It is great high quality swim fabric. I'll put a link to their shop below if you want to check it out and you need some swim fabric. They have adorable prints and things that coordinate really well. So there's no guessing if you want to do pattern mixing or match solids. It just makes everything really easy. And one last thing is I will not be lining this. I'm making a 3-month size for my daughter and there's just really no need for lining. So I'm going to be showing you how to do it without the lining, and I will talk about how to do it with the lining. There's really just the final step of it, finishing the bodice, that I recommend going to the tutorial and checking because I can't really explain it very well without doing it. But if you're doing the lining, this will still be very helpful to complete this swimsuit. So let's get started. Started, we're just going to go over our pieces. You're going to have your front bodice, your back bodice, and excuse my hands, I've been painting and I can't get it off, so sorry about that. But then you're going to have your 2 side panel pieces, which should be mirror images, so when you lay them together, right sides together, they should match. And then when you open them up, they are mirrored images. And then if you are doing the bows, which I am, you will have 6 bows and 6 center pieces. And as I mentioned, I am not doing the lining, so if you were doing the lining, you would have a back lining and a front lining piece as well that would match these pieces. And although I'm not doing the lining, adding the lining in isn't much different, so I will just kind of briefly go over how you will add the lining when it comes to that point. But if you are adding the bows, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your side panel pieces, and if you haven't made your markings on your pieces, you need to go back and do that. There's little triangles on your pattern pieces for the side panels as well as the bows, and I just took a marker and put a dot on each one. So what you're going to do is, you can see I have my dots on my bow piece, and I'm going to just line up each dot along my bow piece, and then I'm going to just pin those in place, and I'm going to do that on all 3 bows. You just want to make sure you line up those marks and you get them nice and straight, and then you'll just do that on your seam side, and just make sure when you put these on you have the right side up. That one's backwards. You want your right side facing you, and like I said, then we will just do it on, put them on this side as well, match those up, and then we're just going to go to our sewing machine with a straight stitch and just baste these on with a long stitch so that they stay in place. So I am going to finish pinning these on and baste both pieces, and then I'll be back. Alright, so I have those basted on. You can see my straight stitches here. This one got a little crooked, but that's okay. I have my bows all on, and now the tutorial doesn't have you do this until the end, but I find it a lot easier to do this now than when your suit's all constructed because you have less material to work with. We're going to do the centers of our bows, and what you're going to do is you're just going to take your strip, slide it in here, and you really could do this before you sew your bows on as well. You could sew your strips separately and slide them on, or you could sew them on each one and then put it on. You just have to be a little bit more careful lining up those edges because it will be squished. I'm going to slide my bow or my center in right side down, and then I'm just going to take my fingers and pinch the bow. You can get, well, this is small one, so depending on what size you make, but I got 2 pinches and this is a 3-month one. So you want to pinch it. You want to do about 1/4 of an inch each fold to make sure it lays nicely. But then you're just going to take your center and fold it around, and it's recommended to sew this with a zipper foot, which I think is a great recommendation. But you want to just fold this around, and then you want to sew along here without catching the bow in it, but getting as close to the folded side of the bow as you can. And I like to kind of stretch it out a little bit too, so that I can sew a little bit further away, but then when it's sewn, it'll stretch back in and be a little bit tighter. So I'm just going to go and do that, and you will repeat that step for every single bow. So I'm going to do this and sew the centers of all of my bows, and then I will be right back. All right, so now you can see I have all of my centers sewn on, and then what you're going to do is you're just going to take your scissors and you want to trim pretty close to your stitching, but not too close that it causes your seams to pop. So you're just going to trim all of those off. You'll do that on both sides, and then what you're going to do is you're going to work it the best you can and flip it right side out. And I do find that sometimes using tweezers makes it a little bit easier. And then just spin it so that that seam is on the back side of your bow, and then center it. And then it should be fine to stay like that. If you wanted, you always could come in the back here and you could put a little liquid stitch or just a little hand stitch in there. But even if it turns out, most likely people aren't going to notice that there's a seam in there. So you just turn these, and the tighter you sewed it on, the harder it's going to be to flip it, but that's okay, because the tighter you sewed it, the better it will stay as well. So you just want to kind of play with them until you get them to lay nicely, and you can kind of adjust your bow, and then you'll do that for the other side as well. So I'm going to finish up this side. See, that one was real easy. I'm going to finish up this side and do the other side next. Alright, so I have those all flipped out, and you can see how cute the bows look. And again, you can just kind of keep playing with them until you get them centered to lay how you would like. And now we are going to, it doesn't really matter if you take your front or back pieces. So I am going to take my back here, and for the back, you're going to put your side pieces along it, and the longer side matches to the back here. So now this is where it's going to vary a little bit if you're doing the lining, but not too much. So even if you're doing the lining, you would do this step. So you're going to just put your bow pieces on right sides together, lining up that top mark there and this bottom straight edge down here. And you're going to do that on the same side. Now, because I am not doing the lining, right now I will be putting in my permanent stitch. I'm going to just take this over to my serger and serge these sides. If you are doing the lining, what you would do is you would just baste these on. So, like I said, not too different. But so I'm going to go ahead and serge these. If you are doing the lining, go ahead and baste these edges together. So I sewed these on, so in one way or another, these should be attached to the side. Now, if you were doing the lining, all you were gonna do, for the sake of right now, we're gonna say this is my lining. You're going to put your lining on top of it. It should be the exact same piece as below, match it. So you're gonna put your right side facing down, and you're gonna line up your edges, and then you're just gonna put your finishing seam along those sides. So then you would just, if you were serging it, whatever you were doing, and then you, once it was sewn, you would flip it right sides out so that then you would open it up and you won't have lining on your sides, but this here would be lined and then this seam would be enclosed in your lining. So it's a pretty neat way of doing it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our front piece and we're going to line up the edge here, and we're basically going to do the same thing that we just did on the back with attaching the sides, and then you will do the same thing with your lining. So you're going to take your main piece and just match up the sides, starting at the top at that little divot. And one thing I will say, if you did it this way, that you did the bows prior to sewing, there shouldn't really be an issue, but you want to just make sure that when you sew over this section, you kind of flatten your bow so that it doesn't get pinched in the seam and cause a ripple. And then we're just going to pull this over this way and match up this side. And so again, if you were doing the lining, this would be a basting stitch. If you are not doing the lining, you can go ahead and put your permanent stitch in now, which is what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna go and serge those edges, or you can go baste them. So I sewed that seam, and then again, is if you were doing the same as we did on the other side, you would lay your lining piece on top here and sew those seams. You just would want to make sure that when you did that, you kept everything bunched up in the back so that nothing got caught out on the sides. And then because I am not doing the lining, this part is super simple for me. I'm just going to line up my crotch seam here and sew across. If you were doing the lined version, it's laid out really nicely in the pattern, but there's a way you do it where if you have all of your layers in a certain order and then you sew them, then that way when you flip it right side out, this seam will be enclosed as well as these seams. So it just makes it a little bit nicer if you have the lining, but we're gonna have swim diapers on and I just don't see the need for a lining for a baby. But so then I'm just going to take this and sew across here, which would be the same thing you would do if you're lining. You would just have 4 layers, but you just want to look in the tutorial and it just outlines it and kind of gives a better picture than I can describe without actually doing it, of how you want your pieces lined up. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew my crotch seam, and if you're doing your lining, you would get it in the right order and sew it. Or if you didn't want to deal with all of the making sure you have the right order and all of that, you could just line up both pieces and sew across, and then you would just have a seam down here if that wouldn't bother you. So that's the other option that is just a little bit simpler and quicker. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this and be back. So I went ahead and sewed that, and now we are just going to sew our shoulder seams together. So just match those up, pin them together, and do the same thing on the other one, and then just sew right across both of those. All right, so I sewed up my shoulder seams. So at this point, your suit should basically be done, and we're gonna turn it right side out. And when I say done, it's looks like a swimsuit, but now all we need to do is add in our elastic. If you have the lining in, what you want to do now before you do your elastic is match up the raw edges of your lining with the raw edges of your suit and just baste all of those openings. So you would do both leg holes, both armholes, and your neckline, basting those 2 layers together to make it a lot easier to attach your elastic and not have to worry about the liner slipping out and not getting caught, or your main piece slipping out and not getting caught when you stitch your elastic in. So as I mentioned, now it's time to add the elastic. I have not cut my elastic yet, so I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. I just want to share a couple tips. I'm using 1/4 inch elastic. I'm not using swim elastic because you really don't have to, especially in kid sizes. They do not wear swimsuits long enough. You know, people will say it's going to deteriorate and rip. No, you have to wear a swimsuit for a long time for that to happen. So I wouldn't really be too concerned about it. If you have swim elastic, great. If not, it's not worth the extra cost of buying that or having another type of elastic. So I'm just using this big spool. I will put a link in the description if you're interested in it. It's pretty cheap, but I do really like it. I get it off of Amazon, and they have a whole bunch of different sizes, and I've used a lot of their sizes, but I think this is 25 yards, maybe 50, I don't know, but they have a bunch of different options. So what I want to show you is when you're cutting your elastic is you want to stretch it as far as you can, like 2 or 3 times before you cut it. What this does is it makes sure that when you top stitch it, elasticity is pulled out, because sometimes it doesn't recover 100% of the way, especially when it's on a spool or something like that. And so what that does is it just makes sure that once it's on and stretched and top stitched, that the length you cut is the length that it's gonna stay. So I stretched it, and now I'm just going to use my cut chart and cut my elastics. And I do think it's really helpful to have some sort of way to mark, whether it's a color or some way to mark which elastic is which, because it's pretty easy to mess them up. You know, like the leg bands and the armholes aren't much different lengths, and so you don't want to put the wrong ones on the wrong holes. So just mark them. So I'm going to go ahead and finish cutting those out, and then I will be back with you to attach them. So I have all of my pieces cut, and for now I just pinned them to where they belong, and then the neckline I know is the neck because it's the only one of that length. But now what we have to do is we have to hook all of the ends of our elastic together. So what that means is we're going to overlap them a little bit and sew them together. Now, especially on the thinner elastic, this can get really tricky. I'm going to show you a couple tricks of how to make it a little bit easier, because basically what you have to do is you have to get this under your presser foot, overlapping about a 1/2 inch, and then sew on top of it there. And it's really hard to keep them lined up so that they stay together as you're stitching. So one way is an Elmer's glue stick. This is just, you can see, typical washable glue stick, and you just put a big dollop on one end. Then you want to make sure it's not twisted when you do this, but then just put this on top. And I usually like to, I have clips, if you, pins won't work quite as well, but I usually like to just kind of clip it so that it can dry a little bit. The other way to do it, this is the same idea, but you don't have to worry about it drying, is wash away hem tape. So basically you would just take it and cut off about a 1/2 inch piece like so, and then you would put that on the top of one end of elastic. And if you're not familiar with wash away hem tape, it's just like it sounds. It is tape that washes out, so it's double-sided, and you can just put it on and you pull the top off, and then you stick it together and it'll stay. And this is actually, I think, kind of a better option than the glue stick if you have it. It's a little more secure, and then, like I said, you don't have to worry about waiting for it to dry or anything like that. And then if you don't have any of those other options, the last thing I would recommend is you just take them and hand baste it. So just put a few stitches in by hand to hold it together. You really don't have to do all of those, but I'll tell you the chances of you getting these sewn and keeping them lined up are very slim, or it's going to take you a much longer time than any of those methods. So to each their own on how you want to do that, but these are the two ways that I use the wash away hem tape and the glue stick. And if you don't have wash away hem tape and you want to try it, I will put a link in the description below. It's not very expensive. I get like 2 rolls on Amazon for, I don't know, $6 or $7 maybe. And I use this for everything. It lasts a really long time. It's also great for hemming and other things when you're top stitching on knits because it'll prevent them from stretching. So that's just a couple ways I use that. But we are going to loop all of our pieces together, and like I said, I'm going to do the hem tape for all of them if I can find the end. And it doesn't matter which end you overlap, but then you're just going to take this over to your machine and you're going to put it under your presser foot vertically. So here's my presser foot. I'm going to feed it under this way, and you want to just do a zigzag over the top of here and go up and down. I usually just go up and down, oops, up and down like 3 times. I'll go up, back stitch, and then back up again. And we're going to do that for all of our elastic pieces, and then I will be back. Right, I got all of my elastic sewn, and I'll just show you here what it looks like. It doesn't have to be pretty because it's hidden. And I will say, I know I mentioned this is a 1/4 inch elastic, so I just did a wide zigzag, and that was almost the width. If you were using a wider elastic, you're going to want to sew up and down that seam instead of across it. But when you're using thin elastic, you want to go this way because it just is not going to give you very much room to work with when you're sewing that way, and it also still allows that to stretch a little bit. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to do my neckline, and that's all I'm going to show you for the elastic, because you're going to use the same method for the armholes, the neckline, and the leg holes. So I'm going to just show you one piece of it, and then you will, like I said, use that same method for all of the elastic pieces. So first thing you're going to do is you're just going to half it and find your halfway points. And you're actually, for the neckline, we are going to 1/4 it because it is a little bit longer. So I'm just using a washable marker. I find that that is the best option to do it. And then I'm going to match up those center points, which was my seam and that mark I made, and make another mark, because you can use pins, you can use clips, but those can fall out. They're not as exact. Markers can't shift, and it can be pretty exact. But so now what we're going to do is we're going to find our halfway points on our neckline. So I'm going to find my center front, my center back, and then we're going to match those up for our 1/4 points. So the only thing that's different when I do the armholes and the leg holes, I typically don't 1/4 it. I usually just use the halves because it's smaller, and the sections are small enough that only having 2 marking points works. And as you can see, my shoulder points are not my 1/4 points on my neckline, so do not make that mistake, because otherwise your neck elastic will be very uneven. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to take our elastic, and I like to put the seam of my elastic at the back of my neckline just because it's hidden a little bit more, and that's just what I prefer. So I'm going to just match up my 1/4 points now. And then I'll match up these. And so now what we're going to do is I prefer to serge my elastic on. You can sew it on with a sewing machine if you don't have a serger. But I am going to take this over to my serger. I'm going to turn off the blade because we do not want our elastic to get cut. And then we are going to sew this. So when you sew it, just like a neckband, you want to stretch your elastic just enough to fit your neckline. So you don't want to overstretch it so that your neckline's being stretched, and you also don't want it understretched so that there is bunching in your main fabric, because your elastic should be smaller than your neckline slightly. So you're just going to go and serge all the way around, stretching this slightly, keeping the edge of your elastic lined up like so on the edge of your main fabric. So you don't want it overlapping like this at all. You want it lined up nice and neat. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this on and I will be back. All right, so I sewed my neck elastic on. You can see here my elastic slipped a little bit and came outside of my main fabric, but it's not too bad, so I'm just gonna leave it, honestly, because we're gonna fold this over, so nobody's gonna see it anyways. It's just on the inside. There's a little bit of white, but like I said, it's not going to affect it, so I'm just gonna leave it. But now what we're gonna do is we're going to fold our elastic down towards your inner suit or towards your lining, and we are going to top stitch it. So you can, if you want, you can go around and pin, and then just like you did when you were attaching the elastic this first time, we're going to stretch it slightly as we top stitch it. You can use a cover stitch or just a basic zigzag. I use a zigzag. There's nothing wrong with that, but you just want to fold it down, and then you're going to sew. And one thing, when you sew, you want to make sure you're sewing over the edge of the elastic. You don't want to sew towards the folded edge, because that's going to make the elastic fold out on the front and it's not going to look very pretty. So you want to sew kind of enclosing this edge in your either your zigzag where it's going over, and it's going to go like right off the edge when it hits the top of your zigzag, or cover stitching, you want this to be in the middle of your two needles. And so I'm going to just go ahead and fold all of this down and top stitch. And so you can see here, when you fold it down like that, it just kind of bunches. That's because you have to stretch it as you sew. And I do have a more in-depth tutorial on top stitching elastic. It is using a waistband, but it is the same method, just thicker elastic. So I will link that in the description if you are wanting to watch that as well. But I am going to go ahead and get this all pinned and top stitched, and then I will be back. Okay, so you can see here my elastic is top stitched and it's good to go. So then that leaves the stretch, and I usually lengthen my zigzag to about a 3 because you are stretching it, so it doesn't have to be super tight, but that's just kind of my preference. You can use a smaller zigzag if you want, but I like a wide, thick zigzag for my elastic top stitching. Then you are just going to use that same method for both armholes and the legs. So you'll serge them on, put them inside, serge them on, and then flip them under and top stitch, and then you are done. So I'm going to go ahead and do my other elastics and finish this up. Once you get all of your elastic sewn on, you are done. And this is just so cute. It's even cuter because it's so little, which everything is cute when it's this little. But so here is my elastics, and one thing I will say, I think it's 9 month and below. I believe it's all the sizes that use the 1/4 inch elastic. The shoulder seams basically butt up right to each other, so when you fold them over, they go right next to each other. So you just want to make sure when you're top stitching those, you don't overlap your top stitching. But other than that, that's really the only thing. And then down here, I top stitched my leg holes, and it is so cute. And I will add, if you put in your lining, you will have basting stitches there, so this won't be very stretchy, so you can go ahead and either just stretch it and pop those stitches. Don't be afraid to just pull on it and you might hear some popping and rip those stitches, or to go in with a seam ripper and pull out those basting stitches so that it has the stretch, which even that's like here on the side, I had those, so you can hear that pop kind of pull there. That's not as important to have the stretch, but you can take the basting stitches out of your swimsuit. So if there's a part that's not stretching, just think back, did I have to baste that? And if you did, that means we got to take those basting stitches out so that we can get the stretch back in that piece. But then here are my bows, and like I said, this is just adorable. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this fabric is from Raspberry Creek. All of these are, and so this is a striped print that it has more colors on the stripe, but I cut it out just to get the colors that coordinated even better with this print. But I am obsessed with this and I can't wait to try it on my daughter. But if you have any other questions, feel free to leave a comment down below, or you can find me on Instagram. It's at Sobex, BEXX, and I would be happy to help you there. And I'll also put a link to the pattern down below. If you haven't grabbed it yet, make sure you grab it. There is a baby option, which I believe is newborn to a size 4. The girls option, I believe, is 12 month to a 12 or 14, so there's a pretty wide range of sizes for this pattern, which also makes it great if you want to do matching sets for sisters or cousins or anything like that. There's a wide range to get those patterns. So thank you for joining me today, and if you haven't, make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel so that you're notified of future videos. So thanks for watching. Bye.